Afternoon, and thank you for joining us for today's series as we discuss the basic fundamental movements that we teach at R2HP and the Sun and Alp Golf Club. And today we're going to be discussing what these fundamental basic movements are that we coach and teach trainees and athletes through, and also why they're important. And we'll continue this series and other frames on the individual movements themselves, and we'll break them down into the kinematic movement patterns and how we individually teach these from an unweighted to a progressively heavier external load in more detail in the future. But today we are just going to be discussing these fundamental movements and what they are and why they're important again. And these movements are the basic full squat, hip hinge, pushing, pulling, lunging, bracing, and weighted carries. And these movements aren't specific to my knowledge, or it's nothing that I've invented. These are basic movements that other coaches and trainers across the world have practiced for tens of years before even I have been introduced to them. And it is something I do believe highly in, and have a real interest in developing these basic movements for the trainee or athlete before any special physical preparation is introduced into the program. And why is it that these movements are so important? Is, well, first of all, the very nature of them being basic. And what I mean by basic is that they're fundamentally a part of our natural joint and musculoskeletal arrangement that happen to take place on the sporting field and or daily life. These basic movements are the very nature of how we move through three-dimensional space and time. And the problem is wherein lies is that a lot of times for the very nature of maybe the fitness industry is that a particular coach or trainer, hypothetically speaking, will get an individual who like to lose a few pounds, and they start working with this individual, and in the context of making things interesting and fun for the trainee, which there's nothing wrong with that, by the way, we create a platform, or hypothetically, some trainer creates some platform to make exercise interesting and creates a slew of exercises that are numerous and endless in nature to keep things fun, interesting, and to keep the stimulus different for that individual so that they don't get bored. But the very problem with that approach is that it's really, really difficult to quantify any real measurable progress through the training program when you have 38 different exercises that you're choosing from. And I always tell people that come to me and say, I get bored doing the same things over and over again, and I always will challenge them, are you exercising because you want something fun to waste your energy on and to end up on a pool of sweat on the ground and then go on with your life, or would you actually like to see results? And when we're measuring results, we have to have exercises that we can quantify. And when you take the basic squat, hip hinge, push, pull, lunge, brace, and weighted carry, it's a lot easier to quantify the actual exercise in and of itself, and then we can cross-reference that to the goals that the individual has and see if there's any real correlation with what we're actually doing in the gym with the results that they're seeing. If you take the basic movements out of that equation and you start throwing in a bunch of hoopla and other crazy exercises, it gets really fuzzy on what's actually creating results. And we have also found that using just these basic movements, you often see real attainable results in the most minimal time frame available. And oftentimes I'll get questions, well, if hypothetically you don't change the exercises, how are there going to be continued results? When a lot of times we hear through various fitness media that in order to gain progress through exercise, you must change the stimulus to continue an adaptation, which is true, but there are many ways to force a continued adaptation through the hypothesis that Hans Selye proposed many years ago, the general adaptation syndrome hypothesis that he stated. There's many ways to drive an adaptation, and changing the exercises is never the only way, and frankly is, I think, oftentimes the most inappropriate way to drive an adaptation. Let's take the basic squat for an example. If we want to continue to drive an improvement in that exercise, what we find is that for the novice trainee, their adaptation opportunity is so huge because they don't have any fitness to begin with, that we can incrementally increase the weight on that squat for a long time before they reach any sort of plateau in which we have to bring more creative approaches to the table. And it's a lot higher of an adaptation window than people think. It's not the case where you take a novice trainee and have them squat and within 6 weeks they've adapted from it. Because again, their strength level is so low that it's a far cry from what their baseline is, a far cry difference from what their potential is in terms of that movement. So nonetheless, it requires a significant amount of time dedication to these basic fundamental movements before any sort of general, before there's any special physical preparation that's even needed, if needed at all. And it's particularly for the athlete. At times we hear, there's this big movement in the last 10 to 15 years for sport-specific training, but it's completely erroneous, because most of these people that are participating in real sports at a high level, first of all, have a huge baseline of general strength, and more often than not, a lot of the high-level athletes are just participating in the sport in and of itself for a stimulus to get better at the sport. Many people have said this before, and I'll resonate with it. If you want to get better at skiing, for example, you better go skiing. Or if you want to become a better marathon runner, you need to spend time on the pavement putting your miles in. But it's completely crazy to think that you can go into a gym environment with no basic strength and perform a few medicine ball rotations, and all of a sudden it's going to transform your specific ski movement patterns. It just, oftentimes we don't see that. What we do see is individuals who have a basic level of strength, they go out onto the sports field and they actually start to flourish when those levels are achieved. And they're different for everyone. It's not some pie in the sky number that is unobtainable. So nonetheless, let's develop a basic understanding of fundamental movement, progress through those movements, quantify those movements, measure the results, and we have found over and over again that it tends to transform the individual looking for health and wellness and looking to lose a few pounds, whether they want to look better with their shirt off, whatever the goal may be, or for the athlete, that the basic fundamental movements, time and time again, prove to work. And that ends the series today, and we'll continue on in upcoming segments as we will specifically break down each of these movement patterns and teach them on a one-on-one basis here, and we will demonstrate those movements for you. Thank you for joining us today, and we look forward to continuing on here in the future.